the ability. Never mind. You're recording now. Go right ahead.
Okay. All right. So what you want to do is go to classwork and then Zoom class files. Okay. You want to bring up this document, government economics. You're going to fill this out as we go through the PowerPoint. Okay. We're going to talk about two things, government economic policy and then Federal Reserve. Okay. So we'll get to that in just a minute, but make sure you have that up and you're going to turn that in, and that's for credits. And Mr. V, since there's two students, I may forego the Jamboard. Oh wait, we got another one. Parker's in.
Yeah, we're up to 4.
All right, never mind. We'll do the Jamboard. So go back to Classroom and then bring up the Jamboard. And what you guys are going to do here is tell me where you think money comes from. Put a Post-it on there over here on the side. You can do a sticky note, put your name on it, and then put it in the Jamboard. Tell me where you think money comes from.
According to my father, it does not grow on trees.
Does not.
How do you do it?
You just click on the sticky note.
It says view only.
No. Oh, I messed that up. Let me see if I can change it.
I didn't really know that the Zoom meeting was going to start. So I said, where's Mr. Ficker? I was going to run up to your class and just say, start the meeting.
Okay. Refresh your page. I think you guys can add stuff to it here. And Colby, I'm glad you didn't scare me.
We're good. I got it.
Okay. All right. I updated the permission. So you guys are just coming in, go to Classroom. There's a link for a Jamboard under the assignments for this week. So it's the Zoom class files, and then there's a link to a Google Jamboard, and there's a Google Doc for notes that you're going to do as well when we go over the PowerPoint. Okay, so where does money come from? Colby, I'm assuming that was you. It does not come from me, unless you are one of my children. It does not come from me. Okay, the government, that is mostly correct. Central banks. If you combine the government and central banks together, there you go. That's where it comes from. So the government prints it, but they leave it sit in a bank, and it has to be lent out by a central bank, and that's something we'll talk about today. Okay, while you guys are finishing that up, I'm going to get my attendance real fast.
We lost Parker.
Yeah, he was in for a second.
I think you just have Colby. The rest are my kids.
Okay, all right, thank you.
That's just a shame. That's just a shame.
I agree.
Where's class at, Mr. Ficker?
I agree. Okay, so there we go. Money comes from the government and a central bank. They combine it, but we'll get to that in just a second. Let me share my PowerPoint with you. And you want to use this for your notes. So bring up that Google Doc for the notes. Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to look at, and this is for air test, there's going to be some air test questions about fiscal and monetary policy. And you need to know the difference between fiscal and monetary policy because both of those control how much money people get and also how much money is available and how much it costs to get money if you want to get a loan. Okay, so first we're going to do the easy one, and that's fiscal policy. So that's government taxing and spending. And this could be state government, or this could be local government, or this could be the federal government. We're going to focus on the federal government. Okay, so what is fiscal policy? It's the government making decisions about taxing and spending to regulate the economy. So if you have a job, you know this. The government, all levels of government take money out of your paycheck. You pay taxes. They tax income, and your income taxes are withheld by your employer. Okay, and I want you to think about this if you have a job. If our government, our federal government decides, like it did in the first year of the Trump administration, we're going to give everybody across the board a tax cut. Okay, you're still making the same amount of money. You're still working the same amount of hours per week. But the federal government decides we're going to cut your taxes. Okay, and let's say it ends up being you end up paying $50 less per week. Well, that means your employer is going to withhold $50 less, which means your paycheck is going to be bigger. Your take-home pay, because you're paying less in taxes, your take-home pay is going to be larger. Okay. Now, what do you think the federal government wants you to do with your money? I want you to spend it. And if you spend it an extra $50 a week, I mean, multiply that by, the 180 or million people that work in the United States, that could really spur the economy. So it uses taxing to try to increase people's spending to help the economy broaden. Okay. Also, to encourage economic growth, it will increase government spending. Okay, that's what's going on now. There was a 1.9 trillion with a T, trillion dollar bill passed last week by the House and the Senate and signed by President Biden that puts a $1.9 trillion into the economy. So the government is spending almost $2 trillion more. And that's if you have a job, actually, you guys probably didn't get one because you're dependent on your parents, but this is where the stimulus checks come from. Okay. And there's other things in there to increase government spending. Again, hopefully, if you get a stimulus check, the government wants you to spend that money. That's going to help the economy grow. Okay. But there are times, actually, believe it or not, when our government wants people to spend less money, because the more people spend, the higher prices can go up. And the higher prices go up, the more money people need. And that's kind of like a never-ending cycle. Prices can get too high so that people can't afford it, afford items, okay? So if the government thinks the economy needs to cool down a little bit to prevent real high inflation, it will increase people's taxes, because if it increases your taxes, that means your employer is going to have to withhold an extra $50 a week from your from your paycheck. It means you're taking home less net pay. So you have to decrease your spending. You can't spend as much. Also, it will so it'll increase taxes, and at the same time, it will decrease government spending. So it might say, well, you know what? We're not going to give these millions of dollars out for, let's say, highway repairs, okay? Because we don't want that money to go out there. The construction business, prices are getting too high. We don't want to be a part of that. So it actually will take away government spending. If it does that, then the economy will cool down a little bit. And once the economy cools down too much, then you can see that they'll probably go back to, well, let's decrease taxes and increase government spending. So the government's always looking at the economy and trying to figure out what we can do to keep the economy from deflating too much or inflating too much. Okay, now there are two terms that you'll need to know for the AIR test: contractionary fiscal policy and expansionary fiscal policy. Okay, expansion, I think, is the easier one to understand. When something expands, it gets bigger, obviously. So if the government wants the economy to get bigger, what it'll do, it has two tools. This is fiscal policy: taxes and government spending. to expand the economy. It will decrease taxes. That means people will have more money in their paycheck. They're paying less income taxes. Okay, that will increase consumer spending. It'll increase business investment as well. Okay, so demand will increase. Because demand will increase, prices might rise. It's okay if prices rise as long as we can afford it. Okay, employment will go up. GDP, which is a measure of the economy, gross domestic product is what that's called, that will go up. So that's to expand the economy. If the federal government wants the economy to contract, to shrink, okay, it still has those two tools, taxes and government spending. It will decrease government spending and it will increase taxes. People's paychecks will become smaller because they're paying more in taxes. So what does that do to consumer spending? If my taxes go up, I can't spend as much. So consumer spending will go down. And actually the government would want that to happen because then what that will do is stop prices from rising really fast. Business investment will go down. Okay, I know that sounds like a bad thing, but sometimes it's okay because then businesses will say, well, we don't have as much money. People aren't investing in us, so we can't make a new product or we can't expand our business like we want to. Okay, demand will decrease. Okay, and that will lead to lower employment, lower price levels, and lower GDP. The economy will shrink. And you might think, well, why would the government want that to happen? Well, look at the situation now. I mean, there's a lot of jobs right now. I think there's more jobs than there are people looking for jobs. If that's the case, then what will happen is you'll actually make more money. It's hard to find a job that pays minimum wage now because there's a lot of demand for jobs. Even minimum wage places are saying, well, we'll hire you for $10 an hour or $11 an hour. So sometimes that might not be a bad thing. Okay, so that is fiscal policy. Fiscal policy is the federal government, the legislative branch working with the president to figure out, okay, what are they going to do with taxes and government spending? This one is called monetary policy. This is the second thing that the government can do to control the amount of money in circulation. Okay, now those of you that said money comes from banks, you're correct. And actually there's a bank called the Federal Reserve Bank, which was created over 100 years ago to help regulate the amount of money in circulation. Students have always asked me throughout the years, and Mr. V, you've probably gotten this question before. Hey, if we're in so much debt, why don't we just print as much money as we can? Let's print a $20 trillion bill and the government can pay off its debt. Or if we're not making as much money, why don't they print more money? Well, if you print too much money, prices will, and put too much money in circulation, prices will rise really, really fast. They might double in a day, you know. Price of gas right now, I know it's almost $3, but let's say it's $2.50. If it doubles every day, what will the price of gasoline be in a week? It'll be $5 tomorrow. It'll be $10 on Friday. It'll be $20 on Saturday, $40 on Sunday, $80. It'd be $320 a gallon by this time next week. Okay, that's obviously an extreme example, but the federal government doesn't want that to happen because if that happens, the economy crashes. And bad things happen when the economy crashes, not just economic wise, but politically as well. Okay, so the Federal Reserve uses 3 tools to prevent the money supply from getting too high. If it thinks too much money is in circulation and prices are rising too fast, they'll pull money out of the economy. If they think the opposite is true, we need the economy to increase. We want people to increase their spending and prices go up. They'll increase the amount of money in circulation. Okay, now here's how it used to be for the federal government, okay? Got these 3 images in here that should help you out with this one. We don't do this anymore. We haven't done this in 50 years. But the federal government used to have these gold bars in vaults around the United States, okay? And the amount of gold that the government had in its vaults and how much that was worth determined how much money the government could print and how much money the government could put in circulation, okay? So if the price of gold went up, that meant we could put more money in circulation. If the price of gold went down, decrease, that means they're going to have to decrease the amount of money in circulation. They got to pull dollars out of the economy. That, our politicians figured out 50 years ago that maybe that's not a good thing, because the government has very little control over the price of gold. So what it'll do is, what it did was said, well, let's just take us off the gold standard. And actually nothing of value backs our currency. There's no gold or silver in a vault anywhere that backs our currency. Okay. What backs our currency is the value that we give it. Okay. So if you think, let's say you buy a new video game, and you're looking at that video game and you're like, good Lord, the price of that video game is $80. I don't think it's worth it. I'm not going to spend $80 on it. You're putting value on how much a dollar is worth or how much a video game is worth. Okay. So that's how that works. I know that's a weird concept because there's nothing physical that backs our currency. It's just the idea of what we think it's worth. Okay. So there is no gold standard. So the Federal Reserve Bank determines the correct amount of money, or tries to determine the correct amount of money in circulation. And like I said, they use 3 tools, and they'll ask you about these tools on the air test. Okay, now let's look at the Federal Reserve. It actually is a bank. Okay, I'm going to go to the next slide. First, there are banks where these blue dots are in these cities all over the United States. So there's 12 districts of the United States, and there's 12 Federal Reserve banks. So the Federal Reserve Bank in District 4, which is West Virginia, parts of Pennsylvania, and all of Ohio, and a little bit of Northern Kentucky there. The Federal Reserve Bank is located in Cleveland. And they actually literally have money sitting there that's been printed, and they're waiting to put out in circulation. There's a branch office in Cincinnati, okay? I went on a field trip, a teacher field trip a few years ago to the Federal Reserve Bank in Cincinnati. They took us into the vault. I stood next to this plastic locked up container that contained, it was like $51 million in that container. Okay, it's just sitting there doing nothing. Now, should they put that money out in circulation? Well, it depends on how the chairs of the Federal Reserve, each of these districts has a chair, and there's a chairperson for the entire country that runs, that's the boss of all of these 12 folks, okay? They make a determination of how much money can be in circulation. So that's right, 13 people decide how much money is in circulation. Okay, they're pretty powerful. So that's one thing they do. They regulate banks. They make rules for the banks, what they can and can't do. They supply money. Now, they're also the government's bank. So when you make when your employer withholds your money from your paycheck to pay your taxes, it goes to a Federal Reserve Bank. Okay, but this is what we're going to focus on. Number 2, supplies money and credit to the economy to maintain stable prices, to try to prevent inflation from jumping too fast, and full employment to make sure that people have jobs. Now, how does it do that? Okay, it does 3 things. It changes the discount rate, which is the rate that it loans money out to other banks. It changes the reserve requirement, which is how much banks can have in their vaults. They're required to have in their vaults, or they buy and sell bonds. Okay, now we'll go over each of these, all 3 of these in detail here, okay? The first one we're going to look at is the reserve requirement. This one is, I think, the easiest one to understand, okay? I always ask students, what's the purpose of a bank? And their response is to lend out money. Like, yeah, you're partially correct, because a bank is a business, and the bottom line for a business is making money. So a bank makes money by lending its money out to us for a car loan or a house loan or a student loan or on credit cards. It also takes its money and invests it in stocks and bonds and so forth. So it tries to make money, and believe it or not, it shares some of that money with you. If you have a savings account in a bank and it earns interest, that's actually the bank sharing some of its profits with you. Okay, now, knowing that, it makes 0 sense for that bank to have money, wads of cash sitting in its vaults, because if it's sitting in the vaults, it's not making any money. Okay, that money's just sitting and they're doing nothing. Kind of like the money I saw in the Federal Reserve Bank, just sitting there. Okay. But the Federal Reserve tells banks you have to have a certain percentage of your wealth, 3%, 4%, 5%, whatever, in cash in your vaults. So if a bank is worth $1 million and the Federal Reserve says you need to have 3% of your value in there, that's, what is that, $3,000? I think I'm doing my math correct there. That's $3,000 that they always have to have in cash sitting in their vaults. Okay. Now, if the Federal Reserve Bank says we need more money in circulation, what it will do is it'll tell the banks, we're decreasing the amount of money that you have to have in your vaults. Okay. Because then what the bank will do is take the money out of the vault and lend it out. That money then goes in circulation and people can get loans and buy cars and houses and go to college and so forth. Okay, so they lend it out. That means there's more money in circulation. If prices are going up too high and the Federal Reserve chairs want to decrease the amount of money in circulation, then they'll raise the reserve requirement. They'll tell a bank, we're going from 3% to 5%. You got to have 5% of your value in your vault. So that means that they have to take some of their investments and sell those. They have to call in some of their loans and they have to keep that, so they have to put more money in the vault, which takes money out of circulation. And that means that there's less money for the people to spend, for us to spend, okay? Now, they usually do this in extreme emergencies. This hasn't been done since 2008, the Great Recession of 2008. So it's rare that they make banks do this. They keep that reserve requirement pretty constant for banks. Okay, now I think this is the hardest one to understand. This is the discount rate. And I've seen this on the test, on the air test, more than any of these other concepts. Okay, so the way the Federal Reserve Bank works is it's not a regular bank. You can't go into the Federal Reserve Bank in downtown Cincinnati and say, I'd like to open up a checking account. They don't do that. They only operate with other banks. So if your bank that you do banking with needs money, it goes to the Federal Reserve Bank. And the Federal Reserve Bank lends money out to banks. Okay. So it's a bank's bank, I guess, is a good way to put that. Okay. So the discount rate is the rate that the Federal Reserve Bank loans money cash out to other banks. So if a manager of a bank says, oh boy, we're getting a little short on cash, we have a lot of people coming in and they want loans, we don't actually have the money to loan them, they'll call up the Federal Reserve Bank and say, we'd like $1 million. And then that money that I was standing next to in that vault, the Fed workers will come down and actually take that money and then send it to that bank. Now, they usually probably do it by electronic transfer, but if you've ever seen armored cars out on the road, if you have ever worked or know somebody that's worked at Kings Island does a lot of work in cash. So they have armored cars come there 3 or 4 times a day. Those armored cars take that cash and put it in, they actually could go to the Federal Reserve Bank in downtown Cincinnati. So if I needed $1 million cash, I'd send my armored car down there to get it. Okay. And then they bring that money to the bank, but that money is not free. They just don't say, here you go. They lend it out to a certain percent to the bank. And if the bank wants to make money off of that money that they get from the Federal Reserve, they have to lend it out at a higher rate than the Federal Reserve Bank lends it to them. So if the Federal Reserve Bank lends it to them at 3%, that means that they have to lend it out at like 5%. The bank has to lend it out at like 5% or 6%. Okay. Otherwise, they're not going to be making money. So they have to pay that money back and then some. Okay. So as long as they make their $1 million back, plus the 3% that they're being charged, they're breaking even. But they don't want to break even. They want to make more money than that. So they lend it out at 6%. And that extra 3% that they lend it out at is their profit. Okay. If the Federal Reserve Bank says there's too much money in circulation, the economy is too hot, we need to cool it down, what it'll do is it'll raise the discount rate. If I think the discount rate is 3% today, and I'm a bank manager and I call the Fed and say, send me $1 million at 3%. If they want less money in circulation, what they'll do is they'll say, well, hold on a second. We're not lending it out anymore at 3%. We're lending it out at 5%. And I say, ooh, I can't afford that. So I can only give me $750,000. See how that works? Because it costs more for me at my bank to get money. I can't get as much as I want. So I can't lend that out. I can't lend the $1 million out because I can't afford to get $1 million. So I'm going to get 750,000. And I'm not going to lend it out at 6%. I'm going to lend it out at, because they're charging me 5, I might lend it out at 8%. Okay, that's a big jump in a bank loan interest rate. Okay, so if I'm a consumer and I'm looking to buy a house and I'm like, oh, I found my house. It's $200,000. I can afford a $200,000 house at 3% interest from the bank, or 6% interest from the bank. I go to the bank and they're like, whoops, sorry, they raised the rates. It's not going to cost you 6, it's going to cost you 8%. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I can't afford that now. So I have to go back and reshop for a house. Instead of 200,000, I can maybe only spend $175,000 on a house. So you see how that works. The more expensive it is to get money, the more the less I'm going to spend money on. And when the interest rate goes up, my credit card rate goes up as well. So I might not be able to put as much on my credit card and so forth. So the Fed uses this discount rate. This is what they use most often to control the amount of money in circulation. Okay, so if the discount rate is raised, if they raise the amount of money they're charging banks, then there's going to be less money in circulation because money is more expensive. That decreases the amount of money, and that's going to lead to deflation. I know you've heard of inflation, but there's also deflation, which is a stabilizing, or really in reality, a lowering of prices. Okay, but if prices stay too low, that's not good. That's what caused the Great Depression, was deflation. Okay, so if they want to increase the amount of money in circulation, they want to increase spending, individual spending, and how much money banks have, they'll lower the discount rate. So let's look at that and see how that works. Okay. If what they'll do is they'll say, okay, well, I call my bank and say I'd like $1 million at 5%, and they say, whoa, it's your lucky day. It's now 2%. Whoa, I can give me my bank 150 or 1.5 million. And then I'm going to take that money and lend it out. And so it'll become cheaper. I'll pass that savings on to my consumers. Loans will become cheaper. Credit card rates will become cheaper. People will spend more money. Okay, so that will increase the amount of money in circulation, which will lead to inflation. Inflation is okay. That's a rise in prices as long as we can afford it. Okay, now the last tool that the government uses is buying and selling bonds. Okay, and the act of buying a bond works like this. If I want to buy this $100 savings bond, I have to give, cash to the bank, and they give me this $100. Now I can't, or this savings bond, I can't take this savings bond and spend it. Before I can spend it, I have to cash it in. And these make interest. These make really low interest, like 2%, 3% a year. But the federal government gets the money. It's like buying stock in the federal government. They get the money and they use this money that I give them to cover their debts. Okay, so if the Fed wants less money in circulation, they want to decrease the economy because prices might be rising too fast, they'll actually sell more bonds. Because to sell a bond, somebody's taking cash and turning it into this bond. That's taking money out of circulation. Okay. If the banks want more money in circulation, they'll put an incentive out there for people to sell their bonds. They'll say, wait a minute. Okay, so you're not getting 3%. We're going to give you a 5% on if you want to sell your bonds today. So what you'll do then is you'll take your bond to the bank and you'll turn it into cash. That increases the amount of money in circulation. Okay. So there you go. Now, my kids all got savings bonds when they were for birthdays and Christmas and so forth from relatives. And they all cashed those in when they turned 16 and bought themselves a car. So they couldn't spend it until they actually cashed it in. Okay, so that's how that works. That was putting more money in circulation. Okay. Any questions on that? Are we good? Okay, because wow, it's 10:15. That's what time class ends. That was good timing. Make sure that you fill out this PowerPoint, or I'm sorry, the note sheet. Mr. V recorded this and we'll post it online this afternoon. So if you need to go back and fill that out, just go back and watch the part of the video that you need to watch.
And be sure this week to take the diagnostic tests if you have not done so already. Please make sure that you also complete the assignment on Chair the Fed, which will make a little bit more sense after Ficker's presentation today about what the Federal Reserve Chairman is attempting to do. And then there's also an activity on the budget as well. So please make sure that you are keeping up to date on your work. We're closing in on spring break here. Try not to leave points on the table is my point with that. So try and make sure that you're all caught up with that. Again, you have 2 effort-based assignments on air diagnostic tests, and then you have basically some effort-based assignments on further learning in those areas. So next week we'll be talking about federalism, and we'll be talking about local government and the Ohio Constitution. Riveting stuff, I know, but stuff that we need to get through for the air test. Ms. J, do you have anything to add?
No, just make sure you are taking all the diagnostic tests. Don't just take one and turn it in. Make sure you actually complete all of them and then submit it.
All right, folks. Well, we are past our time, so stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you next week. A reminder that tomorrow is an air test in the morning, so none of you will be required to be here in the morning if you are in person, and the rest of the day will be spent in cohort or your Butler Tech program, depending upon who you are. So just a reminder, Thursday and Friday are weird kind of schedules because of the air test, so don't forget about that. Please make sure your parents know too, is because of course, if you don't wake up on time to go to school, they're going to freak out if they don't know that you don't need to be in until 10:20. So please make sure that you are on time to cohort tomorrow. If you are coming, please make sure to notify the school if you are not. Figure anything more?
That's it. Thanks for your attention today. I hope I cleared up where money comes from.
Have a good day, folks.